Kissmetrics, which we've used for a long time. It was implemented probably 5 years ago for event tracking, and it's become, we still use it quite a bit, but it's become a little bit of a mess, right? There hasn't been a lot of discipline around adding events, a lot of consistency in naming conventions and things like that. And then the other issue with Kissmetrics is that it doesn't support event properties. Properties are global, and they're not actually connected to the event that they're fired with. So those were some problems we're trying to address. We looked at pretty much every solution out there: segment, heap, amplitude, mixed panel. They're just all so expensive. And then I know like Tristan's articles and his writing on that topic has resonated a lot with me. So we looked at Snowplow. We ended up building something in-house that we call Beacon, but it's basically, we borrowed a lot from Snowplow. So the scheme is very similar. We have basically 3 giant tables: one that tracks sessions, one that tracks page views, and then one that tracks events.
Okay.
And so we're sitting on all this data, and it's great for people who know SQL and can use SQL, but there are a lot of people who are feeling the loss of, the one nice thing about Kissmetrics was it had a great interface for building cohort reports and funnel reports and searching for people that meet some kind of criteria. And so that's what we're trying to figure out how to address. So yeah, just trying to understand what other people have done to solve that problem. We've thought of the 3 solutions that I mentioned in that post. One, like pumping all of our events into a third-party tool like Amplitude after the fact, building something in-house, or trying to use something like Looker, which I know a lot of people use on top of Snowplow. Seems like. So that's kind of where we're at, just trying to get smart on what other people have done to solve this.
So just to add a bit more context, what warehouse are you on, and what's your BI layer at the moment?
We use Snowflake. It's been amazing. And then we use Tableau. And to be honest, I haven't really tried to do anything with our event data in Tableau. I'm just worried it's going to choke on it.
And overall, you're pretty happy with like the underlying structure of the event data, like as in you think there's like good data in there. It's not a case of
data. Yeah. So I mean, we put a pretty robust process in place to validate events before they get sent to the warehouse. So it's very similar to what you guys have with, or what you had at Airtable. I was just looking back on that article. We have like, you have to plan out the event scheme ahead of time. You have to define the names of everything, the property types, and then we have a validation layer that will send everything to a bad events bucket in S3 if it doesn't get validated. And so we only send good events through. It's very clean and well documented because we wanted to do it. We wanted to do it right.
I think you're already in the 1%. Cool. Does anyone want to jump in with like how they're solving this in their organization before I sort of talk about what I've seen out in the wild? No. Okay. Cool. Okay. So there's kind of a few approaches to this. And I'd say like the first one is to just go with the tool that's right for the job, which is Amplitude. It's expensive. It is the best in class in terms of exploring data. And if your events are like well structured, then Amplitude's really, really good because it just gives so much power to your users. That's option 1. Option 2, which is what other people kind of mentioned, was to try and get something like Looker to do your bidding for you. One thing, so there's also another thing around like you have page views and you don't have sessions at the moment.
We do have sessions as well.
Okay, cool. So we do all of our sessionization in dbt. I'm just going to very quickly make sure I'm on the right page. Looker segment block. So this, I'm going to share my screen really quickly.
Cool.
I can't. So this is the Looker segment block, which basically is like for segment data, but it's a similar enough structure to do it. And the idea is, I have a client that has this, but I can't show you client. I'm actually trying to find the code. But essentially, like you can write SQL. You can use Looker's like derived queries to have parameters where you say like, I want to choose these 3 events, 1, 2, 3, and then it does a very basic like count of this event to count of that event to count of that event. So if it's mainly people who are looking at your event data for what they would call like funnel analysis, even though it's not actually a funnel visualization usually, then that's a suitable solution. Like if all you want to know is like how many people went from 1 to 2 to 3.
Yeah.
As soon as you start getting into things like how many people went from 1 and then went to 2 versus 2, like 2A versus who went to 2B, like if they had 2 choices, that's like just not a thing that SQL supports. And like we as a company are very like SQL is the best way to do data transformations, but I think this is like product analytics is one thing where SQL is not the best tool for it. If you already had Looker or if you already had a like SQL based tool, I would recommend like starting with this and building out like a dynamic dashboard where someone can just choose like event 1, 2, 3, 4 and then have like a very rudimentary funnel. Tableau, like you could definitely do it in Tableau as well. I've seen it. But if you are looking for, I've not used Kissmetrics, so I don't know what that interface looks like, but Amplitude is, in my opinion, best in class in terms of like.
Yeah. So I guess are some of the concerns I have about Amplitude warranted? Like one of my big ones is I want to make sure that if people run a query on Snowflake or they look at a report in Amplitude, that they get the same numbers. And we've already had to do a lot of, like we do things like deduplicating events, because sometimes we'll get duplicates because it's a distributed system. We do aliasing as part of this is all in dbt, which has been fantastic. Like sometimes events fire where we don't know the user's ID at the time, but then if we find it out later, we'll go back and put the ID on it. There's other types of cleanup that we might have to do. Like we've even just in the last 2 weeks, we've had to rebuild our events table, a couple times. I'm worried that once we send something into Amplitude, like it's there forever, we can't ever go back and change it. And so we're going to have diverging metrics based on if someone's using Snowflake or looking at something in Amplitude. That's probably the thing that scares me most.
Yeah. I would say like we like at my last job, we had Amplitude and Looker. We made it very clear that like Amplitude was for exploratory analysis, and Looker was for like the defined
source of truth.
Like if someone wanted to know like a KPI rate, we felt better about like, that is something that you can define in SQL. If someone wants to know like what the cancellation rate was, that's something that you can define in SQL. But if someone wants to know like how a user interacted with the product, it's not really a KPI. I think it's very much exploratory.
Right.
There's actually also on this, just to plug someone else's Slack. I don't know if you're part of Locally Optimistic Slack.
I'm not on their Slack, but their newsletter is amazing.
Newsletter's amazing. Ping Michael Kaminsky on the dbt Slack and ask for an invite. I would recommend everyone to do that. There's a really good thread in there from a few days ago where people are talking about similar things, about, what's... Oh, no, I'm completely wrong. This isn't a dbt Slack. I'm so sorry.
That's about segment versus amplitude, right?
Yeah, that's the one.
That was a good thread. I remember that.
So there's a few people jumping in there.
Yeah.
Is that helpful at all?
It is, yeah. I mean, you're making me think that maybe we should consider amplitude, right? Like even if the data doesn't match perfectly, can we keep it good enough that it's useful for PMs or others who need to just do more exploratory stuff?
Yeah.
So that's been helpful. Okay. People seem to like it a lot.
Does anyone else want to jump in with like what their companies?
I can hop in real quick. Can you hear me? So we do exactly that. So we use Segment, which is expensive, but we also use Amplitude. So it really takes a lot of the strain off of the event exploration piece. And so like our primary users are the PMs. The dev team is pretty integrated like with the actual segment data and knows some SQL, but PMs don't. So I'll send them reports that are directional in Amplitude and then allow them to develop a hypothesis, and then I'll go build out some of that hypothesis data in Looker. is what we use for BI. So like once it's a little more targeted, then I'll build out the actual data system. But when it's exploratory, we're not sure. We're trying to see if this hypothesis exists. We'll use Amplitude as the place to go look at that, track it, get that hypothesis at least sound and tested, get the right metrics, and then we'll make that happen in Looker once we have good requirements.
Awesome. So your segment data is flowing into Amplitude, but also into data warehouse?
Yeah, so it all ends up in Redshift. It doesn't all end up in Looker. I'm very thoughtful about what I actually move into the DB pool because it's too much data.
Yeah, okay. And you haven't, like the problem of consistency in reporting between Amplitude and Looker hasn't been
not for us because
you kind of know what tool to use.
It's exploratory. Yeah, so like once exploration's done, then I kind of own definitions. And what actually ends up in Looker is kind of like signed off by the analytics team. We own the definition, we own knowing why it's different, if it is different from Amplitude. And so I think it's just like really good communication. So we have like a release channel where we say, we've released this segment data into Looker. Here's why it may be different from what you see in Amplitude. And a lot of the time, that's just because we're mixing it with other sources outside of segment. And so naturally, it's going to be different just because there's a lot more combination and transformation going on.
Yeah. Makes sense.
We haven't interacted so much with the segment versus Amplitude discussion, but we've encountered a lot the issues of like what you're talking about of users have access to multiple distinct data sources, and then they go run analytics off both of them. Right. And you're kind of not in control of who is always writing the analytics. And then they go to executives and people get conflicting metrics and all hell breaks loose and we don't trust the data, this and that. And what's interesting, at least for me, is that, and I think a lot of people on this call, we're all kind of like technologists or engineers at heart. And so our instinct is to sort of go towards the technological solution. Yeah. But what we've experimented with, and at our clients, we're a consulting firm as well. So what we've seen be more effective at our clients is you kind of get to a point where like you have to say, there has to be sort of like an imprimatur of this is an approved report. Kind of like you have to almost have, and I hesitate to say the dreaded words of like governance council or something like that, but you almost have to say like, okay, yeah, you can have kind of the Wild West and you can go have your own things or whatever. But if you want to get to a certain point and you want to present to executives or you want to make company decisions beyond a certain level, your analytics that you produce have to go through the review and approval process, and they have to have standard metrics and standard terminology. And we also have to kind of evaluate the appropriateness of the data that you used for like your intended use.
Yeah.
Right. And the extreme of that is we did a major, actually at a previous consulting firm, we did a major implementation project for the American Red Cross, where we literally went through and replaced their whole blood banking system. And, in IT, we joke a lot about, well, if we get it wrong, someone won't die. Actually, in that project, if we got it wrong, someone really would die. And the extreme there was they literally had a whole regulatory regime and the FDA was on them and everything. And we were also redoing their data warehouse and their off the biomed stuff. And you literally, before you were going to write a report, you had to submit an intended use statement and get specific detail about exactly what you were going to do in the report with it and everything. Probably going to that extreme isn't appropriate for what you're talking about, but I'm just like,
yeah, there's a principle there for sure.
There's because there's a certain point where what you're really concerned about is, I think, first of all, how are you going to be held accountable for how other people use the data and make decisions, right? And B, you don't want people to stop trusting the data, because once that happens a few times, you lose all credibility.
Yeah.
Right. So that's how we've tried to do it and how we've seen, it's not perfect, but the best approach we've seen to what is essentially more of a political problem.
Yeah,
right.
That's really helpful perspective.
I'll add on to that. Periscope in their latest update actually rolled out the equivalent of like Twitter verified check marks. So dashboards that have been like stamp of approval, peer reviewed by the data team, have those little check marks that indicate like you can trust the numbers you're looking at, as opposed to things that people are just building that haven't been reviewed. I don't know what the logic behind them is. They don't have that. So people know that if it's got the little check mark, you can trust the numbers you're looking at. If it doesn't mean the numbers are wrong. It just doesn't mean that they're
right necessarily.
Caveat emptor. Yes, let the buyer beware.
I think Tableau I think you can have verified data sources. I don't think they have that for dashboards yet. I don't know if Looker has something like that, but I think it makes sense. It's a good idea.
Well, with Looker, because all the logic is centralized and end users are only using what's been modeled by the data team, if you've done your job right, you can trust that whatever they're building in terms of dashboards and reports, they should be right.
Because the verification happens one layer below that, essentially.
Yep.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool.
I really like that discussion.
That was good. Yeah, it's a
yeah, cool. Does anyone else have a problem that they're working on that they kind of wanted to put to the Brains Trust today?
I think I have a question. Just want to see what others are doing. I think I've seen some discussions on Slack and some proposals around this, dbt Slack, but we're likely to have some use cases in the future where users are editing and data in Google Sheets, and they want kind of like almost a near real time, like change the sheet 15 minutes later, it shows up in their analytics. And I'm just curious if what folks have done around trying to detect changes in Google Sheets, particularly if we're trying to build a slowly changing dimension or something and not just doing a trunk and load every time. We're trying to avoid having to pull in tools like Stitch or other things because we don't have to use them right now. So we don't want to have to use them just for that. So if there's anything with just kind of more basic building blocks that people have been able to do, I'm curious.
So an engineer on my team, Thomas Lapiana, wrote something called sheet load, which, yeah.
Just let the name, sorry.
Is that the official name?
Yeah.
That is its official's name. I'll share it in a second. And what sheet load does is pull the Google Sheet and load it into our Snowflake warehouse. It can pull a Google Sheet or a CSV.
Okay.
We use this only for information that only exists in Google Sheets. So we try to avoid like the case where we're exporting data from something else and putting it in Google Sheets, but it works really well. It is reliable and essentially looks for changes between the Google Sheet and what's in the warehouse and only re-uploads if there are changes.
Wow, okay.
So I'll drop a link right now.
That would be awesome, thank you.
Yeah, we just use
It's a problem I've been tackling in the last few days, and I've been exploring a bunch of different solutions. I've explored using Fivetran, which we are right now for some of our sources. I've explored using Stitch. I've looked at sheet load and a few different approaches. And ultimately what I find is that because business users can do pretty much anything in Google Sheets, and they can break the document really badly, which just creates problems downstream. In the end, I haven't found a really good solution for that where it's fully automated, because those business users can just decide to change the column name or add columns or change the structure, and just then you have things that happens that you were not expected. So right now, the solution I favor right now, because the volume is still manageable, is that it's still a manual process where I manually upload it. Because I haven't found a better solution. So I would be really curious to hear if someone has found a great solution for that.
I mean, I guess like what's in this Google Sheet? What are marketing going to use it for?
So one example would be we have data about potential staffing of resources on upcoming projects. And, yes, I know there are a bunch of different ways and other systems that people could put that in, but they seem to like using Google Sheets for now. And they also want to edit it and, potentially be able to kind of almost do scenario modeling or whatever on a relatively quick kind of basis, but they want to do the modeling interacting with some of the data that we only have in Snowflake that we've processed with dbt.
We have things like sales folks' goals.
Yes.
Yeah. Is something that it lives in a Google Sheet in part because the people who are setting those goals, they just want it in a Google Sheet. And sometimes there is no convincing them otherwise. The way we've managed it is they have the Google Sheet that they work in, and then we have a Google Sheet that lives in a Google Drive folder called Sheetload that imports that data, so it's referencing the other sheet. And that way, in the Sheetload version of it, it's all converted to plain text. So no matter what formatting they do on their end, like the version that gets uploaded to the warehouse has plain text. And then Sheetload runs on top of it.
Yeah, I feel like the classic use case that people end up using, I mean, I end up doing at Excel or Google Sheets a lot, is when you're doing some sort of future predictive modeling, where it's like you don't it's not like there's a great system, like there's Salesforce or whatever for like, oh, I have to maintain my CRM stuff or my contacts. But when there's always the need for this upcoming modeling of resourcing or costs or whatever for other things. And even the schema of the model is always going to change because everybody's just sort of figuring out what the model is as they go. But those are the classic sort of things that you often want to be able to pull in for your analytics too. So, but thank you very much, Emily. I'm definitely going to take a look through Sheetload, and the other problems that were brought up about like anybody could change the schema willy-nilly are absolutely correct. And the only way I can figure to deal with that is just have a sheetload of data tests around every column and every data type and everything when we load it into dbt. So
one thing I will say on this though is I'm currently working with a client that does a thing where they like offload the results of a dbt model to a machine learning process, and then that machine learning process puts another table in Redshift, and then they were using that Redshift as an input to the same model. So just be wary of like, if your sheets are like being built off a dbt model and they're accidentally being used as an input to that model, you can accidentally create
a cyclic
we hacked it, this hack, like the depends on comment. So we've like, when we pull that table from Redshift in like our base model, we have actually the comment saying like this table in Redshift, even though it's being produced in a machine learning model, it actually depends on this other model that's being used as an input for it. So we sort of forced dbt to recognize the dependency there. Took me so long to figure out what was happening and why these numbers kept getting higher and higher each day. That's what was happening. So that's sort of another thing just to future-proof for. Probably Josh is sitting there going, I don't know what you guys are all complaining about. BigQuery has a beautiful Google Sheets integration. But such is life when you're on GCP.
Yeah, it is nice to be able to just set it up as an external table. But I was going to say a couple ideas that I had around the validation side of it. One, you can get pretty far with just using the built-in data validation features in Google Sheets. I mean, you may already be aware of those, but I think a lot of people aren't, where you can set values where it's almost like a drop-down, and it has to be selected from a list of values in another sheet. You can even put in your own custom logic, like if you want to set a limit on numeric ranges and stuff like that. And then the other thing that you can do is, or the way that you actually protect each sheet. So you can make sheets only editable by certain people. You can even protect a range within a sheet. So like you want to have something that's being referenced outside in a particular sheet, you lock that down so only you can touch it. And then whoever is entering things, they have specific columns. And the last thing you could do, it doesn't sound like this would be as useful in your case, but you can always set up a Google form that loads its data into Google Sheet, and that Google Sheet would not be accessible by anyone else but you. And then as long as it's not really an editing kind of model, just like a single entry model, you're just appending new rows, that form really limits what people can do to touch the sheet and like keeps the schema locked to whatever you need it to be.
Right.
We've had success with a very similar Google form to Google Sheet to database setup.
Thanks, everyone. That's definitely been helpful. I'm definitely going to take a look at Sheetload. Appreciate it.
I love that Google form to Google Sheet thing. That's not a thing that I think I've seen on my work so far. So I'm going to lock that one away. Cool. Anyone else want to throw a question out there? No?
I would love to hear about onboarding processes at your team, specifically around onboarding, not to your company, but onboarding into your data analyst or data engineer role, like onboarding someone, or data scientist, if that's what you have. Onboarding someone into a data role. What does that look like for you? Where are your pain points? Where have you experienced pain points? Any general thoughts people want to share?
I mean, I can talk about this from the perspective of when we, frequently we work with clients where they don't have a dedicated data hire, and then we onboard their data hire for them. Like they've gotten to a point where they need someone, and we also really like helping out with that process. So I've sort of seen like a little bit of what clients do, and I don't know. I think like Emily, like GitLab's doing a fantastic job at documenting everything. So that's like the first thing is when we're actually building our transformations, we already have a mindset of like, this is a thing we're going to have to pass on to someone else. So that helps us a lot. When we're onboarding internal analysts, we have an entire training curriculum that takes them 3 or 4 weeks to go through, because it's like not every single day. It's like, do this exercise each day. But I think a thing that's like we're starting to see in clients, especially clients that have grown, clients that were with us a few years ago and they have a DBT project, and then the project has become quite complex, and then they have a new hire start, and then it's hard for that person to understand DBT. Like if they're not used to DBT, they have to like learn that, but they're not coming in and like learning it and creating a new project from scratch and figuring out like, oh, this is how I do that thing. That they're working within a really complex environment already. And that's kind of why we created like our DBT Learn course, which like I'm not here to sell that. That's Erica's job. But genuinely because we had a lot of clients who had new starters, and they were finding that their new starters were like not, they were finding it hard to get up to speed with like what DBT is and what the company is using DBT for. And so if we could like take care of one of those things for them, and in the course we start out with I think it's like a public Airbnb data set. So it's like something that is kind of familiar, listings and hosts and news guests and things like that. So it's got like a familiar feel to it. And they build that from first principles. They actually like understand the why of things a lot more, which means that when they go back to their organizations and look at these really complex projects, they can actually understand and pull apart what's happening a lot better. What we were experiencing a lot was that sort of new analysts would start and the existing analysts would still own like 80-90% of the project, and it was hard for the new people to do anything except work at the edges. So that's the thing that we're mindful of, and definitely I'm very interested to hear if anyone else has any insightful advice there too.
Maybe I can add on this. I can't really talk about onboarding data analysts because I'm currently the only person that works with data at my company, but we have a pretty strong onboarding process for developers in general. We have about 150 developers here. And what we do is that we have a 3-month onboarding program where people starting from day one have a set calendar with LMS trainings, with peer programming, with in-class trainings to learn the technologies, the tools we use. We work in e-commerce development. So they do Magento training, do PIM training, they do all the environments we use, the CI tools we use, basically all the environment, the technical environment. And it's really fun. We have a calendar that sets, here's your objectives for week 1, week 2, week 3. The people, they have to meet one-on-ones with the Scrum Masters, with the product owners. So it's a really well set and well-defined program that starting from day one, we'll make sure that if they pass their probation in 3 months, they're going to be up and running and they're going to be able to work on basically any project. And people actually like that. People usually are very surprised when we do their one-on-ones after the first month about how well they were onboarded and trained. And they didn't have the feeling of, okay, so I have this new job and I don't know who I should talk to or what I should be doing.
That's awesome.
I'm very happy with that program.
One thing I have seen, Periscope on their job applications, they say like at the 30-day mark, you'll be doing this. At the 60-day mark, you'll be doing this. At the 90-day, I think. And I think that's a great way to like align expectations from the jump, which is interesting. We onboard, the way it works at GitLab is your first week is onboarding to the company. And then from the second week forward, you're onboarding to your team. We've tried to improve the onboarding process, but these things have long feedback loops because it's not like we're onboarding a new analyst every week. So you make changes based on feedback, but it's always great to hear what other people are doing. So I really appreciate that, Claire and Martin.
The other thing that Fishtown does is just hire someone from Australia, and that's already come trained. They did that once.
You have to all the appropriate Philadelphia slang. Is that part of the
yeah. By month 3, you'll be using y'all pretty consistently. By month 6, which was yesterday, everyone, 6 months in the US yesterday, I'll be using y'alls. It's a 6-month goal. Hasn't happened.
It's advanced.
It might still happen. Yeah, cool. Any other questions? I'm really enjoying this today, guys. It's really fun. No. Cool.
I can throw one other thing out there, Claire.
Yeah. Go for it.
So we've been loving Snowflake so far. I know not everybody on here uses Snowflake, but I'm just curious. The abstraction away of a lot of the underlying problems, like all the pain on Redshift, where like, hey, my cluster ran out of space and all that. And I posted something in the random channel yesterday, but didn't see maybe nobody else has experienced this. We managed to write a query where we managed to make Snowflake blow up and just get random SQL errors. And I don't mean like the normal SQL error, like, hey, your syntax is wrong. I mean like.
I saw your thread. We had that.
Okay.
And the reason we were hitting that is because we had too many views like stacked deep.
Okay.
And so we switched some to tables and that solved that. Is that by any chance your problem?
No, I'm querying a table directly.
Sorry, Nick, can't help it.
And I did some Googling and found other references that said, oh, like your, what was it? Like your cluster size is too small because you have a complex query and it's running out of local memory on the cluster. And so I went all the way up to an extra large and we're still getting it. I'm using some pretty unusual like window framing features. So that might be it, but we've been waiting for Snowflake for a week and still there's no substantial, I mean, they've said, yes, we're looking into it, but no substantial response. So I was just curious if anybody else had had seen stuff like that before.
I haven't, but do you have a direct contact at Snowflake?
I could reach out to them directly. I was going to do that later today to our actual, like we're a Snowflake partner, to reach out to our actual partner on it.
Because I have a good technical contact there who happens to be a friend of mine. So
if you wouldn't mind passing that along, or if that's
sure,
appropriate, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I'll ask him.
And I can even give I could IM you our support case ID if he wants to know it or something like that, right?
Yeah, sure, that would be helpful.
There was also a solutions architect who introduced himself, a Snowflake solutions architect who introduced himself in dbt Slack this week.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, really?
Yeah, go join our introductions. If they're going to make it not clear, we may as well hit on support.
Help me!
My SQL is too much for your database.
I was really excited. I don't know if you guys saw it. The guy above it is from a company called Monzo, which is a bank in London. They're a unicorn. They're a tech unicorn, but because they're London-based, people over here don't know them. And like it's like the equivalent of someone from Spotify popping their head in and being like, hey, I'm the head of data engineering at Spotify and think your product is great. I was like jumping up and down. Also, our other like favorite thing of the week, which I'll just share with this inner circle, is Notion are now officially using DBT Cloud actually. And like a lot of people love Notion. So we're really excited about that too. That's really cool. Cool. I can quickly talk about some things that are coming up on my road, like a few things that are in my head if everyone sort of had their data therapy time. I don't know if there's a better word for that. Cool.
I'll throw a question out there.
Yeah.
Just to see. So there was an article, I think it might have been Michael or someone from the Locally Optimistic blog about this idea of an analytics engineer. Is anyone actually doing that? Does anyone have a role like that?
Emily, are you doing that?
Okay, so we are not. So at GitLab, we explored the possibility of adding a data analytics engineering role. We wrote out a job description, added it to like the appropriate thing, and the conclusion was we don't have that role. My current job title though is data engineer, analytics.
Oh, so similar idea, I guess. Is that?
It is very similar idea.
Enough of a role to make sense carving out to be something on its own.
That is exactly the decision, that the logic behind the decision that was made was that we don't need another job title. So we have data engineer, specialty. So we have a staff data engineer who's architecture focused, myself who's analytics focused. A lot of my responsibility includes liaisoning between the analysts and the engineers and just making sure that their interests are represented in those more technical conversations. And then we have the same pattern in the data analyst roles. So, we have junior, intermediate, senior, and staff in theory, and then data analyst, finance, data analyst, growth, if you're a specialty, or data analyst if you're just part of the core team.
Got it. Interesting. It's interesting to see how different teams are structured.
Yeah, we don't really have job titles here. I mean, I'm a manager, but like everyone else, we're all just, analyst consultants. And the thing that frustrated me recently at Data Council was when I introduced myself as a data analyst, people were like, oh, data analyst, like didn't really give me at the time of day. When I introduced myself as a data engineer, they were like, seemed to be slightly more interested. I don't know. I felt that like divide between like the two titles at the moment. I think everyone that's bought into like our paradigm is in this like in between space where like, yeah, like I can write really good Python, but I don't want to, I don't want to write Python to an API and grab my data. So I don't know, hopefully analytics engineer becomes a thing. There's definitely a joke that I can make it, really shouldn't. But anyway, yeah, analytics engineer, I like it. I like the concept. Hopefully it takes off because I think there is like, we're kind of in a category creation at the moment. We don't have the vocabulary around it. So I hope we can build that out. Cool. Cool. So a few things on the community front. We have a meetup in New York happening in a couple of weeks, in 3 weeks from today. We're just locking in our third speaker now. It's at Betterment. We're having someone from Betterment, someone from Bowery Farming, and no confirmation on the third speaker. She'll hopefully say yes tomorrow. And we're also going to Zoom that. I haven't fully figured out the details of it yet, but we're going to make it work. So we're going to Zoom that. London is having a meetup in June and they are going to Zoom theirs. So I'm going to be joining their meetup on Zoom, which is, so Andrew and I will both be on it. So that'll be really cool. And Eric, we've just decided we're having another meetup in San Francisco in June. I don't know if anyone else on this call's on that side of the country. So we've decided we're going to try and make this happen. We haven't locked in location or speakers yet, but we have a date because a couple of my colleagues are out there for DBT Learn. I'm not, but I can organize it from afar and then hopefully it'll all happen on the night. So yeah, lots of meetups coming up, and we're also looking to sort of co-brand a couple meetups at MTL Data, so Montreal Data. And then I'm heading back to Sydney in August, so I'm going to be speaking at a few meetups there. So lots of meetups and interesting presentations coming up. We have started, Jake is coming to our New York meetup, which I'm very excited about. So Jake is our software engineer. He works remotely in Boulder. I've hung out with him once in real life, so I'm very excited to hang out with him a second time in New York. And the third time I hang out with him is he's in Sydney at the same time as me. So I don't think it's this weird thing where we just keep on managing to cross paths in strange places. The last time was at like the Pocono Mountains for a company retreat. So yeah, Jake's going to be there. Super exciting. So our next release, Jake is starting to work on it now. I think 0.13.1 should be in alpha today. Connor should have done that. There's just some quoting things that was affecting Snowflake Snowflake users. And sort of they're using it on an edge case. I don't know much about the fixes going out in 0.13.1. And we started work on 0.14.0. Emily, one of your tickets or issues I should say, from a very long time ago Jake's just finished the pull request. So a new subcommand, dbt-list, which just lists all the things in your project, but you can give it different arguments. So upstream, downstream, so instead of select, it's going to be, instead of dash models, be dash select, because it will give you back models, macros, whatever you want. And like sometimes I just find that useful when I want to hit dbt run and I don't actually know what I'm selecting. So I'll be able to tell me, like it'll just give me a list of what my selection syntax will select. But if you have a look at the issue, it also sort of sets out a bit of a different selection syntax, which in a future release will set us up really well to change what run does. Run at the moment just runs models. In the future, we want it to be able to run tests and models and things like that, and rather than having a separate dbt run and dbt test. Of course, the old syntax will be supported, but the concept of run being exclusively for models is, we think we are going to evolve past that. A whole lot of other things on the other main focus of 0.14.0, so Wilt Chamberlain is the name of that, is testing. Testing and archivals or snapshots. I think Drew's talked a lot about archives on other office hours. Testing, where implementing warnings so you can set things to be warnings instead of errors. I think we're also pulling out tests to be their own definition. So at the moment, a test is a macro that happens to start with the word test. So we're going to be pulling it into its own object kind of thing. And that's also going to allow us to do nicer things like, what's the error message? Like, how do you can add an error message to a test then, because it will be its own, you can have a config essentially. So within the config, set an error message so that you just can make things a lot prettier basically. And then set warnings, set thresholds. Thresholds can be counts or they can be percentages as well. Yeah, so that's what's happening on our side of the fence. So hopefully that all sounds good. But yeah, other than that, unless anyone has any last things to jump in on, I may close up the office hours.
I know you can only give approximate answers to this, and apologies if I missed it, but I'm really excited about the feature that's hopefully coming on 13.1 to the warn threshold.
Yeah.
On the tests.
I think that one's I think it might be 0.14, but I may be incorrect.
Okay.
Yeah.
May have slid. All right.
We try and go for a release every 6 weeks.
Okay.
So yeah.
So I can come to my conclusions then based on the last release about yeah, I got it. Okay.
I don't know if that includes minor releases though.
Right.
I'll ask Drew when he's back. Drew's been he was in London and then we were in San Francisco and he's away at the moment. So we're sort of not super in a rhythm at the moment. But he's back for forever on Monday. I'm not letting him go on leave again. I'm joking.
The PRs merged though, so you could still look at the. Yeah, I was just looking at it yesterday.
Oh, beautiful. Josh knows more than so good.
But it is in 14.
Okay, it is in 14. Yeah. So yeah, you could conceivably install. Oh, one thing that I actually really wanted to show you guys. This is really cool. Let me just share my screen super quickly. I don't know if you guys have heard of Michael Kaminsky's dbt-helper. It has a whole lot of like little subcommands. I committed a few subcommands to it just for fun. I am activate dbt helper. Yeah, it is. Great. Okay. Hopefully this errors. Cool. This came up the other day where like sometimes you're developing and your model errors and the other ones get skipped, and then you go and fix your model and you want to rerun things. So I think that's like a pretty common workflow. Our Redshift cluster is really slow because we pay for the smallest one. Okay, any second this run will finish. This is not supposed to be the point of the demonstration. But anyway, I added a new subcommand to this helper thing called retry-failed, which will parse your run results and pick up any error or skipped models, and then it will just rerun your run command for those models. I've started using this in my client work. Yeah, cool. So dbt helper retry-failed. And it's not gonna run because I haven't actually fixed my issue. But it picked up that was the one that failed, and we'll try and rerun it. And it will pick up any skipped ones. This got merged yesterday, and already I've been using it. I've just switched over all of my client projects to use my virtual environment, so I have Helper installed. So dbt-helper is a pip package, like a pip install, whereas normally we recommend dbt brew. So brew install dbt. So I'm pretty sure most of you will be comfortable installing a pip package, but if you already have dbt installed by brew, it may just be a little bit funky, but that's okay. Yeah, I wanted to show that off. And
does it run downstream too, or just the failed models?
Actually, that would be a really good thing for me to add as an argument. At the moment, it just runs errored and skipped, so it kind of assumes that like in the first time you ran it, you did like your full selection syntax, I guess. Because I think typically my workflow is like I'll run the model plus the downstream ones. Like I'll run that syntax, and then now that I have this, I think like instead of just running the model that I'm working on only, and then when that passes running all the downstream models, I think I'll just switch to like always selecting the model plus downstream, and then just like keep retrying those failed ones until they work. But that could be a really good argument to add. At the moment, it has no arguments. So.
Okay. Yeah, that's how I would run it too. So
yeah.
Works
Cool.
for me.
Yeah. Excellent.
That's super cool. I'm very excited to use
Thank you
it.
so much. My Python is slowly getting better. If you look at it, it's terrible. But,
I just won't look at it.
Yeah, just don't look at it. It works. It's magic.
No, I'm sure it's great.
Yeah, I learned a lot about integration tests. It's good. Yeah. Cool. Okay, I will close up office hours then. Thank you so much for joining, guys. And Emily, she's gone, but guys and girls. We're back on in 2 weeks. We're definitely putting this in the diary as a recurring thing now. And otherwise, I'll see you guys at various meetups in between.
Cool, thanks. This is fun. I wanted to,
Thanks, Claire. Thank you.
Let Eric say hi before you sign off, Claire. Eric is a manager on the team here at least. I think you all have talked on Slack, but he's been listening in, enjoying the conversation.
Oh, okay. Lovely to meet you as well.
We were talking about starting a user group in the Salt Lake area. I don't know.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, we should. Well, now you've heard. We're going hard on the meetup, so yeah. I was sort of a bit swamped by client work until recently. So hopefully you guys have noticed that there's been a pickup in the community aspect of things. A lot of discourse articles coming out.
Well, you've got our support anytime you want to come out to the Salt Lake area. So.
Okay, good to know. a lot of the US I need to see.
Yeah. Good to meet everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.
See ya.
Later.